My mother practices cello at least 2 hours a day. I asked her about her practice recently, and she said that 2 hours is what she feels she needs just to maintain her current level of proficiency. This reminded me of the old joke about Carnegie Hall. As the story goes, violinist Misha Elman was walking from Carnegie Hall toward his hotel following a rehearsal one night. He was not happy with his playing, and he had his head down. Two tourists who saw his violin case asked him, "How do you get to Carnegie Hall?" Without looking up, he replied, "Practice, practice, practice." This, in turn, reminded me of the idea made famous by Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers, that it takes 10,000 hours to become extraordinarily proficient in certain subjects or skills. As a millennial, I felt compelled to Google, how long does it take to master a skill, to check if this was really true. I was relieved to discover that Gladwell's 10,000-hour rule has been debunked by some researchers, but it clearly still takes a lot of time to practice and master a skill. Not unlike the Carnegie Hall joke and Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000-hour rule, this week's Torah portion teaches us that regular practice is critically important for our spiritual lives. 5 verses into Parashat Tzav, we read, "V'ha'esh al hamizbeach tukad bo lo tichbeh, uvier aleha hakohen etzim baboker baboker." The fire on the altar shall be kept burning, it shall not go out, and the priest shall kindle wood on it every morning. Eish tamid tukad al hamizbeach lo tichbeh. Fire shall be kept burning regularly on the altar. It shall not go out. The 13th century commentator, Nachmanides, notes the seemingly repetitive language. Citing an earlier midrashic source, Nachmanides teaches that anyone who lets the fire go out, whether or not they are a priest, has actually violated a negative commandment. We are prohibited from letting the fire on the altar go out. But how do we keep that fire alive today, without the Mizbeach, without the altar and the centralized temple? The Hasidic master Elimelech of Lizhensk teaches that this fire is the holiness and the divine light within each of us. In his Torah commentary, the Noam Elimelech, he comments on the word tamid, which means continually, emphasizing that we each have an obligation not only to keep the fire, the light, and the holiness within us alive, but also to regularly add holiness to our lives, stoking the spiritual fire within. How do we do this? Practice. In the context of this week's Torah portion, the idea of practicing in order to keep the fire alive is actually complicated and raises a few different questions. The first is that regular practice requires a routine, which can feel not fiery and fervent, but dull. The second tension is that the commandments outlined in this week's parashah don't seem meaningful, accessible, or inspiring. What's the point in practicing them, and are they even relevant? And third, why is the commandment to keep the fire going phrased in the negative? Lo tichbeh, you shall not let it go out. We need to address these issues in order to understand the usefulness and power of regular practice. If you've meditated regularly, or if you're like me and you took piano lessons in elementary school, then you can probably attest to the fact that practice does not always feel good or enjoyable. But it sets us up both to reach those heights and to cope with those lows. Even seemingly simple and accessible spiritual disciplines, such as mindfulness meditation, require practice. In an interview, one of my Jewish meditation teachers, Yael Shai, said the following: "To reap the full benefits of meditation, it's vital to establish a regular daily time to meditate. It's kind of like this. If you don't exercise, you'll probably get by in life. But if you do exercise regularly, your body will be more limber and healthy, and you'll feel better on a regular basis. The same goes for meditation. You establish a pattern that allows your mind and heart to be healthy on a more regular basis. When you make the time to support a practice, eventually that practice supports you." Those of you who know me know that I'm not an athlete, but I've been told that when you're a serious runner, going on a long run, once you've hit that 5th or 6th mile, you feel pretty good. Our tradition affirms the idea that our exertion in the short term will help us feel not only good and supported, but lifted up in the long term. The Talmud teaches that when the Israelites reached the Jordan River, those who had been carrying the Ark of the Covenant were lifted up and carried across the river by the Ark itself. In other words, if you bear the sometimes heavy weight of regular spiritual practice, you will be lifted up and carried by your practice in times of need. There is a tension here between hitlahavut and hergel, passion and routine. Routine is, by definition, predictable and potentially dull. I struggle with this, as I imagine many of you do as well. For example, when we recite Mincha, the afternoon prayer service, which we just recited, I don't always have a powerful or meaningful experience. But I try to remember that, as this week's parasha teaches, we need routine in order to increase our passion. Like the Kohen, like the priest, we need to add fuel to the fire. That eish, that fire within, can flare up on its own and inspire us on rare and sometimes unpredictable occasions. And we need that unpredictable passion in order for our spiritual practices to be meaningful. But we also need to tend to that eish, that fire, tamid. We need to stoke the fire regularly. If we are committed to regular daily spiritual practice, then we can experience those spiritual heights more frequently. But we will only be carried by our practice as much as we carry it. Taking a step back, it may seem strange that this idea of keeping the inner fire burning, this idea of spiritual passion, is embedded in a Torah portion about the ancient rituals of sacrifices and offerings. Rituals that are not easily made meaningful or feel relevant in this day and age. But that's actually part of the point. The mitzvot, the commandments, which are at the core of Jewish spiritual practices, are not always meant to be immediately understood and meaningful. Based on Psalm 18, the Midrash Genesis Rabbah teaches, Lo nitnu hamitzvot ela litzaref bahen et habriot. The mitzvot were only given so that people could refine themselves. Spiritual practice, even when it feels boring or difficult, is meant to refine us, to make us better people. Practicing, even when the meaning isn't immediately obvious, is part of that process. Indeed, the commandments in Parashat Tzav do not, on the surface, lend themselves easily to meaning. The descriptions of the various types of sacrifices make it hard to see how mitzvot are going to sustain an inner spiritual fire. That's why we have to see these and other mitzvot as part of a larger system of tzeruf habriot, spiritual refinement and growth, which comes through discipline and through a sense of obligation. Cultivating a sense of obligation in spiritual practice helps us strengthen our sense of obligation in the ethical realm as well. Feeling that we're not responsible to anything but ourselves often goes hand in hand with coarseness and ignorance, while feeling that we have obligations to something beyond ourselves goes hand in hand with kindness and empathy. A sense of obligation opens us up to what is needed around us. I believe that is the purpose of mitzvot. As the Hasidic masters taught, mitzvot, which we often refer to as commandments, are opportunities for tzavta, for connection and presence with each other and with the divine. Mitzvot are opportunities to practice what we preach. That's what Parashat Tzav, the portion of connection and presence, teaches us. The question then is, which mitzvot ignite the fire within us? Or rather, as this week's Torah portion teaches, which mitzvot will help us keep that fire which is already burning within each of us, from going out? The commandment of lo tichbeh, don't let the fire go out, is an unusual negative commandment. Most negative commandments are shev v'al ta'aseh. As Sylvia Boorstein says, don't just do something, sit there. But to keep the fire from going out, you actually have to do something. This is a negative commandment that actually requires our attention and action. We have to have diligence and even discipline in keeping it going, because that is the nature of spiritual passion, or any kind of passion. Passion doesn't just keep going if you do nothing. Our spiritual and ethical lives won't improve by doing nothing. On the contrary, if we do nothing, the fire will go out. So if the essence of the commandment is active, why is it phrased in the negative? To teach us that the divine fire is already there within us, always burning. We don't need to create it, but we need to keep it alive through spiritual practice. As we discussed, we need to push ourselves to cultivate practices, even if they don't always feel exciting or uplifting, with the knowledge that even without obvious or immediate meaning, they can become powerful and indispensable. At the same time, we need to be attuned to the fire that's already there, to the things that naturally ignite our passion, and we must nourish those things. By cultivating practices around both of these things, we can keep the fire within burning and growing. According to the great theologian and activist, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, it is through spiritual practice, through mitzvot, that we can find the real meaning of life. Heschel says that in this way, we can feel that whatever we do, we are ascending step by step a ladder leading to the ultimate. Heschel says, in aiding a creature, we are helping the Creator. In supporting the poor, we fulfill a concern of God. In admiring the good, we revere the Spirit of God. In loving the pure, we are drawn to God. Heschel reminds us that spiritual practice includes not just prayer and meditation, but also, perhaps even more importantly, promoting that which is right and pursuing justice. Rabbi Art Green interprets Heschel, saying that mitzvot are the means by which we reach toward transcendence. God, in God's love for all of us human beings, calls upon us to do transforming deeds that will at once make our lives holy and the world more whole. And this is what we take upon ourselves in cultivating and nourishing our fire, our eish, tamid, daily. We commit to the ethical work of practicing rituals that connect us to something greater than ourselves. We commit to making our lives holy and the world more whole. All it takes is practice. Kadish de Rabbanan. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah. Bi'alamat divrach yiruteh v'yalmich malchuteh. B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayeh dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala u'v'zman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei tekudasha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran ba'alama v'imru amen. Al Yisrael va'al Rabbanan va'al Talmidehon v'al kol Talmidei Talmidehon v'al kol man de'oskin be'oraita diva atra hadein v'diva chol atar v'atar Yehei lahon u'lachon shalom rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichinu mezona rivicha u'forkana min kodam avuhon divishmaya v'imru amen. Yehei shalom rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav hu barachamav ya'aseh shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Bruchim to you. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. I want to make everyone pause for one more second because one spiritual practice that's important to me is the expression of gratitude. So I'd like to thank all of my teachers and my peers and friends who joined me today, but I especially want to thank my senior sermon advisor, Rabbi Danny Nevins, and my mentor, Rabbi Gordon Tucker, both of whom studied the Parsha with me and coached me. And I also like to thank, again, my family and friends who traveled to be here with me today. And most of all, I am obligated to thank my wife, Gabriella, who's been more supportive of me. She's been more supportive of me than any spiritual practice I've ever experienced. So please join me for refreshments outside. Thank you.